Thanks so much for joining us this evening.
Hello.
We're thrilled to have you. And hello, everyone, and happy Pride Month. And thank you for joining us for Happily Ever After Hours with Pixar animator and voice actress Bret Parker. My name is Tracy Timmer, and I'm the Public Programs Manager here at the Walt Disney Family Museum. I'm going to start out the evening by interviewing our special guest before we hand it over to you, the audience, to submit questions using the Q&A feature, which should be at the bottom middle of the Zoom screen. Please be sure to submit all questions to the Q&A section, as we won't be answering questions in the chat function. If you find the chat distracting, you can minimize it on your screen so that it's not visible. Also, please note, due to time constraints, we won't get a chance to get to everyone's questions, but we'll get to as many as we can. So please do not submit your question multiple times. Additionally, we will be reposting a recording of this event tomorrow afternoon. For anyone who missed it or just can't get enough, the recording will be available to everyone for 48 hours on our Facebook page, after which time it will be available for members only in our members only portal on Vimeo. If you're a member, you can access all of our Happily Ever After Hours through the portal by logging in with your member credentials. Your support helps keep these virtual programs going, so consider becoming a member at waltdisney.org/membership or consider a donation at waltdisney.org/donate. And now to introduce our very special guest today. Bret Parker has been working at Pixar for 26 years and has animated on Oscar-winning films such as Finding Nemo and The Incredibles. On the film Brave, Bret shifted her focus to animation tools lead and the development of the current animation software used at Pixar called Presto. In 2018, she took on the role of animation second unit supervisor for The Incredibles 2. In 2019, she and her wife directed and produced her first independent feature documentary, Through the Windows, and most recently, she completed her second independent short film, Pete, based on a true story about gender identity, Little League Baseball, and the people who inspire change by being themselves. Pete recently premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival. And thank you so much for joining us today, Bret, and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here.
All right, we're going to jump right into our first question here. All right, so you've been at Pixar for 26 years now. Can you tell us a little bit about your work before Pixar and the path that led you there?
Sure. So I do not follow a traditional path of animation school and applying for jobs, animation jobs that way. My background was actually in theater and dance. And so I studied in undergrad and went on to grad school, studied film as well, but my focus really was theater and dance primarily. And then after college, I was living in Colorado and had just moved from Colorado to California, and doing the whole looking for work thing. And a friend of mine was like, "Hey, a friend of mine works at Pixar," and I'm like, "Great, what's Pixar?" So it just seems inconceivable that I would be saying that now, but and I put in an application for a production assistant, which as people, I don't know if they're familiar with that position, but basically it's like someone who does anything anyone wants you to do, and that's a low level starting position there, and they hired me. I was actually started off as a temp job that was only supposed to be 4 months, so hilariously, I'm there 26 years later.
Well, sounds like you must have liked it despite starting as a PA.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's so crazy to hear that there was a time that, none of us knew what Pixar was.
No, I mean, I had seen Toy Story and loved it, but I didn't it wasn't a household name.
Definitely not. So you began after your stint as a PA as a fix animator on A Bug's Life. Can you talk about what kind of work that entailed and how your responsibilities shifted when you became an animator?
Sure. So I'll also just touch on, once I was there, basically, I realized how much animation made sense to me. It's so much about timing and choreography and composition and posing, which really in dance and choreography, you're also studying. And so after I worked originally on a CD-ROM project. CD-ROM, which most of these people probably do not know what that is. And afterwards they were like, well, what do you want to do here? And I was like, I want to be an animator. Like, it just made so much sense. And Pixar's always been amazing about supporting people and allowing them to work to change their position within the company. So at that point, I started, I became a PA in the animation department. And I started staying late and sort of learning the principles of animation and learning our software, which is proprietary. So I needed to learn that. And I had wonderful mentorship of some of the animators. And I put together a reel, and they hired me, Pete Doctor hired me as the first fix animator. So there had never been that position. And it's actually an amazing job to start in as a new animator, because what you're doing, since it's 3D, you have some level of just mistakes that animators make. Maybe you pick up a cup and your fingers intersecting through the cup. And so it's little fixes like that. Or maybe it's little adjustments in posing that a director asked for. And so I then, my responsibilities totally shifted, because I was also the fix coordinator. So I would go to all the meetings and I would take all the notes in review, and then I would go back to my desk and I would do all the notes. So, yeah. And then sometimes it would even be animating an extra character that, had been forgotten, because A Bug's Life had a lot of characters. So
Bugs.
yeah, a lot of bugs running around.
That's so cool. So you were kind of like, I assume there were many fix animators to come after you, but you kind of originated the role. You kind of set up all the steps for future fix animators to follow. You were the first of the first. So that's really cool.
Yeah. In fact, they didn't even have a database to track the fixes at the time. So I had a big notebook and I had all of the fixes in it, and I still have that notebook.
Oh, that's so cool. It's a little piece of Pixar history.
Yeah.
Someone in the comments said you basically had to fix all the bugs.
Yeah, I did.
In more ways than one. So my next question is, do you have any core memories that stand out to you about your first film at Pixar?
So my first film was A Bug's Life, as we've just established. And being like the first fix animator and kind of figuring that all out. I mean, it's interesting because I think I worked like we all did. We worked insane hours because none of us really knew what we were doing. But we were inventing it as we went along. It was an amazing amount of work. It was an amazing time of learning, because I was still learning how to animate. I remember one of the first things that I animated actually were the berry splats when I forget now the exact scene, but when Heimlich gets covered in berries. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know if it so much stands out about it. I think mostly the fact that I had so many different responsibilities, and like juggling that and kind of trying to learn how to animate all at the same time. They even gave me, there's this funny story how John Lasseter, when I first met him, thought my name was Brooke, and we would be in these reviews and he would be like, Brooke, did you get that note? And I would be like, yes. And then finally, this went on for like several months, but we were in a review in front of all these people and I didn't want to correct him, Yeah. And then finally he goes, Brooke, did you get that note? And I was sitting right next to him and I finally went, yes, but my name is Bret.
I always I've seen the is it the Pixar story? Is that the documentary that Leslie Iwerks did? Yeah. And they have a bunch of scenes from kind of those early days out in, was it Point Richmond?
Yes,
yeah,
it was in Point Richmond.
And it looks like it was just a lot of fun, and everyone's, just kind of having a good time. There's not, it's not a big studio yet. It's still really small. Seems like
Yeah,
really, really fun. Probably
it was.
stressful, but
Yeah, it was all of that, but it was
yeah,
really fun. It was
totally.
fun and chaotic, and yeah, it was an adventure.
Seems like it. Um, in addition to working as an animator on Monsters Inc., you were also a layout artist. Can you talk about what that entails?
Yeah, so layout is the department where that comes before us in the pipeline, before animation, I should say, in the pipeline. And that's where they are working from the boards, and they're setting the camera. And it's sort of like if you were setting the stage, right? Except it also involves the camera, or in a film shoot. So they're placing the camera and the set and the characters, and they're putting in very rudimentary blocking to sort of get across the timing and eye direction. Um, and that was also a great learning experience for me, because I was able to really learn more about kind of like how you would go about setting up a shot, and sort of the importance then of like timing and camera position, and just even the logistics of working with a digital camera, right? Like versus, a physical camera. And what lenses you might use and how that might change, whether are close to the character or not, and just how you might be, wanting to manipulate a camera. So it was a huge learning experience for me, and I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, sounds like it gave you a really like comprehensive kind of view of how everything works beyond animation a little bit.
Yeah, you often, we're handed the shot when we get into animation, and I think it gave me a broader perspective on what came before it, and also then the freedom to understand if I needed to adjust a camera, then I know how to do that, and
Mhm.
can make some of those choices to bring back to a director and say, hey, what do you think about this instead?
Yeah, that's really cool. And you're just kind of slowly building more and more skills over time.
Yeah.
You also had your voice acting debut on Monsters Inc. How did that come about? And had you always been interested in voice acting?
It's so funny because I had never, it was like animation. I'm like, oh, this is fun. Let's do this. And it was the same thing with voice acting. I was like, oh, this is a job. You're right. Like people do this. So I as I recall, I think that David Silverman was and Lee were the co-directors on Monsters Inc. And I think David had heard me do some like silly voices. And so at Pixar, they always bring in-house people, just like whoever's working there. And now it's much more organized, and it's actors, to do all the scratch. So they had brought me in to do the scratch, for Monsters Inc. for a couple little lines, and they ended up keeping them. And that was sort of the first time I like dipped my toe into voice acting. It was really fun, but it
That's
was
so
just completely happenstance.
seems like it'd be a very fun job.
Yeah, it's really fun.
Totally. Um, well, that kind of leads me into my next question. You were iconic in the role of Carrie, the Incredibles babysitter, who ended up having a lot more on her plate than she bargained for. How did you get into character for Carrie?
Well, that was super fun because um often like when they're doing when they you're like working at your desk and you get a phone call and they're like, hey, do you have a minute, can you come do some scratch for us? And I'd be like, okay, sure. So I went in and Brad was like, okay, I just want you to improvise. And because this was the first time they had auditions for the role. So we went into the booth, and he's like, let's just improvise. And so he's like, okay, be a 12-year-old girl. And he's like, I can't even remember what the cue was that he gave me, but he's like, improvise like you're a teenager. And then he was like, okay, now pretend you have braces. Well, I grew up with braces, so I can do that. um so it was just super fun. And then they also, so that was just for the audition, and then they kept me for scratch. And he would do different things. Sometimes, like I remember when we were working on the role itself came kind of very naturally to me. So there wasn't a whole lot except putting on your voice at the braces to do, like, to get into character for that. But I do remember when we did the short that came after, there's the moment where she sees the babysitter, and she's all like out of breath and everything, but he had me go out and run around the whole building and come back in and then deliver the lines. And he's like, do it again. So I was like, okay. So I ran around the whole building again and came back in, delivered the lines. So sometimes it was real method acting.
Yeah, definitely. Well, your voice is so distinctive. I feel like if I met you on the street, like it would trigger something in my brain that's like, oh, she sounds like that character from The Incredibles.
Yeah. We've had new animators come in, and occasionally they'll be like, I don't get it. Like, her voice is so familiar. And then some
Yeah.
of like, Carrie, the babysitter. Like, oh, yes.
Totally. So funny. Um, all right. On Brave, you shifted roles yet again and became the animation tools lead. How did that change come about, and what was that transition like?
So interesting. I think it kind of all goes back to starting as a fix animator, so which is a more technical position. And also there weren't like all the tools that we have today, right? And so because I had started sort of as a more technical, in that more technical position, I had already worked with some of the tools department as they were developing some of our early software. And I'd done that kind of on and off throughout my stay, like my time as an animator. And then when we were starting Brave, we were developing they were doing a huge overhaul of the entire software system. What used to be called Mendy and then is known as Presto. And they wanted to have someone who represented the animation, who was from animation, but knew the tool, knew like technical. I have a technical sort of mindset, I guess. And to work with the tools department as we were designing the software and testing the software and sort of like starting to lay that out. So it was once again sort of a new position that no one had had. And it's definitely something that started off and has really developed over time. So now we actually have sort of these representatives, tools representatives from each department that sort of work as a liaison between tools and the department. And that all started on Brave. It was a huge shift again in what I was doing, but really fun, really challenging, because the software when we started Brave, we barely had the tools to animate anymore. And it was, animators don't always love change. I mean, I don't know, maybe no one loves change really, but it was a huge departure of what we were familiar with. So it was trying to bridge that gap too of moving forward, but not throwing out the baby with the bathwater as we were developing the new software.
Did you handle any of the training within the team or anything like that also, as far as like getting them comfortable with this new software?
Yeah, that was a huge part of the role, was developing, like cheat sheets and how-tos and demos. And it was like, what, 12 years ago maybe now that we started working on it. So it was also like kind of like and working sessions and training sessions, and that then continued like throughout. So we use a lot of that same sort of development stuff that we started then. We, as new animators come on, we kind of use a similar training system. But yeah, there was a lot of that, and also just trying to figure out what were the we started off sort of just trying to recreate what we had in the sense of like the basics. And then it was really about trying to move the software forward to a new place and be more forward thinking about, oh, but what do we want to be able to do with our software? And
Mhm.
how can we improve and move forward in how we animate?
And I imagine you coming you approaching it as an animator, you know how animators work best and what kind of tools would help your process and whatnot. So you're not just like a software developer that's developing software but doesn't really know the animation process. It gives you a more clear look at like what they need, I would guess.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I honestly believe that, and you might get to this later, but I think that the system we have now is really truly, I mean, I'm biased, of course, but I think it really is one of the best animation software that exists. And the reason is because it's gotten that sort of attention and love. It's crafted by engineers, but also designed and craft with animators working on it and giving their input. So it's not an abstract piece of software that's developed by someone who's not even communicating with their end user. This is like being developed in collaboration.
Mhm.
And so we do have like it's really powerful. I think the result is really powerful.
Totally. And do you think like it sounds like you've kind of gotten all these opportunities at Pixar by being like really open to taking on new challenges that are maybe outside of your wheelhouse. Do you think those opportunities, like, I know you've only worked at Pixar, so you probably can't speak to the animation industry as a whole, but do you feel like those kind of opportunities come up often within Pixar for like other animators, or like, is it just you were kind of in the right place at the right time kind of thing?
I think uh, I think that Pixar's really good about sort of allowing people to grow and change and move around that way. Other animators um one of our animation heads right now actually started in security, right? And he
Wow.
was training in animation outside. He'd been to school. So I think that when you show sort of an interest and an openness, like you said, you have to sort of, I think, have the interest to do something. But as long
Mhm.
as you do, I think they're really open and supportive of you kind of following your dreams and pursuing that and trying to make that work. Yeah.
That's really cool. Um, Outside of your work with Pixar, you've directed and produced two films, a feature-length documentary that you created with your wife, and an animated short. Did you always know that you wanted to create your own films? And what were the challenges associated with making your own movies?
Um, I didn't know that I always wanted to make work. I think that that's part of the path. Coming from a performance background, it's interesting because as a choreographer, I feel like it's a very parallel position to a director, to directing a film,
Mhm.
because you have to have the big picture. You have to know what the whole story is, right? You have to know what the costumes are and the design and the light. And so when you're directing a film, I feel like you need to understand all of that as well. Um, I feel like after all the experience of being an animator, but also being at Pixar and learning more about the craft of making films, um, my wife is a teacher and full of stories. So I feel like we're constantly talking about the stories we want to tell. And finally, Pixar has this amazing program. It's called the Cooperative, and it allows you to carve out and make your own independent film, but they will support you in terms of finding, like all of the people who worked on both films are from Pixar,
Mhm.
volunteering their time. And then they also, in the case of the second film I directed, was an animated film. And so then providing the software for us to be able to use. Is an amazing opportunity. And so once I realized that we had this opportunity, I was like, wait a minute, let's let's do this. Like, it's such a rare opportunity to have because it's so expensive to make a film. And most of that are the people. And then to have such talented people as resources and friends and colleagues makes it, like even more exponentially a more amazing experience. So yeah, the first film was called Through the Windows, and that is about the first known gay bar in the United States that ever opened up its windows and allowed the public to see in. And it would happen. It's called the bar is called the Twin Peaks Tavern, and it weaves together the story of the bar and the mostly now older clientele that still goes there because they're mostly gentlemen. And what we realized is that because gay history is an oral history primarily, it's not taught in schools, it's not something that is part of our education, that as these people are dying, their stories are dying with them. And so we really wanted to take a moment to share the stories of not only the bar, but of the patrons that are still going there. So
That's so cool. I'm gonna have to watch it. I walk by that bar all the time. I've been to that bar. I didn't realize that it was the first gay bar to open their windows like that. That's so cool. I had no
yeah.
idea. Well, that sounds like an amazing film. Can I ask like how, I know you mentioned it being really expensive to make a film. How did you get funding for making a documentary like that? For any like aspiring documentary filmmakers out there that are daunted by the process.
By the process. Well, that's where, again, because of the cooperative, we were able to pool together up to $10,000 worth of educational stipends. And that we were able to make the documentary with that money because all the other work was being donated, essentially. Even the composer donated all of his time and the score, which is just phenomenal because that alone can be, it's thousands of dollars. And then also through the cooperative, there is a post-production grant that you're allowed to apply for another $10,000. And then outside of that, I did a lot of fundraising on my own, just applying to grants. And so I would just say to anyone, and then likewise for the short film that we just completed, Pete, that premiered at Tribeca and has been at Frameline this last week. So that's been really exciting too.
Amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you. But for funding, it's just, start early in the process and write, and get the word out there. And, it is, that's again though why I feel so fortunate to be able to have access to the Pixar cooperative.
That's really cool. Well, thank you for sharing that. Definitely want to check out that film. All right, I think we're going to move into some audience questions. So audience, be sure to submit your questions to the Q&A section. All right, so our first question is from Aaron. Hi, Bret. Did you have more fun working on the second Incredibles film than the first, or were they both equally enjoyable?
Oh, that's such a good question. It was really different experiences for me. So they were both very enjoyable. The first film for Incredibles 1, I was animating. I did have the amazing opportunity to animate my own voice, which is like, a chance of a lifetime. So that was super fun. And then for Incredibles 2, because I was the second unit supervisor, it was just a very different role. But I loved that role. As a second unit supervisor, you're working with the crowds team and just a smaller group of animators, and you get to really, there's a little more creative freedom in that, but yet you're part of this bigger team as a whole. So that was really fun too. So just really different experiences.
They're both amazing movies. I think we have a lot of I know Incredibles is very popular in the like art community, so I'm sure there's a lot of fans here. All right, this next question is from Mark. Where were you in college dance theater? He says his theater major was at the University of Minnesota. And that was the basis of his 40-year career as a movie creature maker and VFX artist.
Oh, I love that story. That's awesome. I went to Oberlin College in Ohio and had a degree in their dance performance program there.
Awesome. Yeah, I could totally see how choreography would translate to animation. That makes total sense. Like it's not
Yeah.
like necessarily something you would see probably when you were younger, but it totally
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Our next question is from Bess. When developing a story, how much are you writing to adults versus kids?
You mean does I guess I can't clarify. I wonder if she means personal story or like Pixar story. For personal story, um it was really different for the two films. I felt like Through the Windows is really because it takes place in a bar. I feel like it's a very accessible film to all ages because these are adult stories and it's taking place in a bar. I feel like that story in and of itself is geared more towards adults versus children. Pete, the film that we just finished, the animated short, is a gender identity story about Little League. Oh, you told the blurb about it. So, but it's
You
told
can tell
through.
us more though.
It's through the basically it's a story told through the eyes of an 8-year-old cisgender female who identifies as Pete, as a boy. And so for me, I think that is incredibly accessible to all ages. Maybe 5 and up from that. I think that there's something that children can relate to as well as adults.
Totally. That's such an important story to tell for kids and adults alike, for sure. I can't wait to see it. Are we able to watch it yet, or where can we find it once it's out?
It's not currently out because we're still in the festival circuit. Currently both Tribeca and Frameline have it. It's accessible through streaming. So if you wanted to see it, you could log on to their websites and you can access their streaming that way. And it's called Pete. So it's available there. And Through the Windows right now is just available through our website, which is throughthewindows.com.
Great. To check it out. Thank you. What is your first memory of LGBTQ plus representation in TV or film? Was it a positive representation? Why or why not?
It is such a great question. I don't know that this was the very first time I remember I saw LGBTQ representation in media, but Desert Hearts definitely stands out to me as a film that it came out in 1985, and I think I probably saw it a little bit after it first came out. And it's a beautiful story, a lesbian story, and it has a positive ending, which at the time was like really rare. So it was such a strong positive sort of example of a good relationship versus any sort of like so often there used to just only be tragic endings. So it was a really positive movie that stood out to me at the time. Yeah.
That's great. All right. Our next question is an anonymous one. If you had an opportunity to recruit people from any industry other than filmmaking to work on an animated movie, where would you start your recruiting search?
Oh, well, that would be that's a tricky one because I wouldn't be able to work with someone who had no experience and wanted to animate, say, for example. But if you were interested in production work, I think that there's a lot of different jobs that apply, right? And I think it's so much of it is about being organized, being proactive, solving problems, communication, and those happen in almost any environment, right? So I waited tables for, before I worked at Pixar. I mean, I had a lot of jobs, but waiting tables was one of them. So, it doesn't, you're right. Like, we don't have to look just within the film industry to find people who are a good match. I don't know that I can like, I can't think of like, oh, exactly where I would look outside of that. But I think there's amazing opportunities to sort of shift. It doesn't have to just be within the film industry that when you're working on a film. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard similar things about production. Really, the ability to work with people sounds like a big one.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of personalities.
Yeah.
And we're all artists, so you know how that goes.
Um, so LGBTQ plus representation in media has come a long way, but it still has far to go. What developments have you been excited to see, and what do you still hope to see in the future?
It's been very exciting for me to start to see LGBTQ characters that are normalized in film. Where it's not necessarily even a film about a queer character or a gay character, but that they are part of the script as a whole. Like Booksmart, I think, is a great example, where they're just like every representation in that film. It's so delightful. It's so exciting. And it's, Olivia Wilde did such an amazing job making sure that we all felt seen and heard in her film. It was beautiful. And then on top of that, I think it's also more like a heart stopper right now, which is celebrating, a gay relationship. And so going from the excitement of normalizing it, but also to films and series or streaming that are celebrating gay relationships. It's really exciting to me.
Totally. Yeah. Booksmart's an amazing film. I love that movie so much.
Oh, right. It's so good.
So great. So fun. What advice would you give to someone who wants to get into animation, voice acting, or filmmaking? Probably different for each, so take it one at a time.
Okay. Yeah, totally different for each, actually. There's the practical side. If I were to say now, I felt so fortunate I didn't go, my school was Pixar. If you really want to become an animator, I do suggest trying to go to school for animation. There's so much specificity in the principles of animation and what you're going to learn through that experience. Although starting off just, gesture drawing, observation, like looking at the world and being aware of what people are and drawing and thinking about that. Theater classes also, it all weaves together. But filmmaking also, I think, maybe if starting to make your own films, even though on the side, I think school is a great path for that also. But there's so much to be gleaned from just diving in and making your own. There's so many tools that are accessible now. You can start making films on your iPhone and edit them in iMovie. I think it's really helpful if you want to make film to try to do a lot of different things and figure out what you like. Even if you think in animation, there's character designers, there's storyboard artists, there's visual effects, there's simulation. There's so many aspects to creating an animated film, and each path is a little bit different. So it's good to sort of dive in and see what makes the most sense for you, and to explore that and take that time. And then voice acting, again, it's an amazing career or side career. I personally took these classes at a school called Voice Tracks. There's other ones in the Bay Area. Voice One is another one that kind of just teach you the ropes, and how to put a reel together and how to get an agent if you want to do that. So there's a little bit of learning, or maybe a lot of learning in each category. And I would say the thing that they all share in common, I would say persevere. Um, there's a lot of competition in the field in all of that. It's, all under sort of film umbrella. And don't be too thin, have thick skin and persevere and follow your dreams. If you really love it, you can make it happen. But you might have to go through a lot of no's before you get your yes.
Definitely. Do you have any tips for voice actors as far as like, I don't know, do you drink like tea and honey beforehand or anything like that?
Water for sure, lots of water. And improvise off screen. I mean, not even off mic, I should say. If you want to play with different characters, it's good to be loose and improvise and find the different characters. But yeah, and tea and honey's not terrible.
I know nothing about voice acting. All right, I think this is actually our last question. Are you doing anything special to celebrate Pride this month?
Well, we have been, since we've been a part of Frameline, it's such an amazing film event, the largest LGBTQ film festival in the United States. So we've been seeing a lot of film. So it's been really fun doing that. And then we'll probably be participating in we'll see what festivities are happening this weekend too.
Fun. Great. Yeah, Pride starts, I think, tonight, technically, in San Francisco. So
yeah,
should be a lot of fun. All right. Well, thank you so much, Brett. This has been so lovely having you and learning about all the different things that you do. You have so many great things that you've worked on over the years. So we really appreciate you being here. And thank you so much to our audience as well. And I did have a note. I realized I said that we would be reposting this tomorrow. And because it's a weekend, we won't be reposting it until Tuesday of next week. But it will be reposted. So I just wanted to make that correction. Even though we've reopened our museum doors, we are continuing to roll out exciting virtual programs. So don't forget to sign up for our e-news and follow us on social media for the latest announcements, and visit our website calendar at waltdisney.org/calendar for our current schedule of offerings. Members of the museum get the scoop and priority access to all programming, including our virtual programming like Happily Ever After Hours, and extended access with our members only portal, where we host recordings of all of our Happily Ever After Hours. So visit us at waltdisney.org/donate to help support all of our virtual programming through either donations or membership. Thank you so much for joining. We hope you and your loved ones are happy and healthy, and we look forward to seeing you at the museum. Happy Pride Month, everyone. Thanks, Brett.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank you. You too.